In 1942, Japan ruled the skies. The Zero fighter was unstoppable, faster, deadlier, untouchable. But when one of those planes fell into American hands, the balance of power shifted forever. This is the true story of how knowledge, not firepower, won the war in the Pacific. June 4, 1942. The Pacific sky was burning. Japan's mighty air power ruled the islands, and their fighter, the Mitsubishi A6M0, was feared like no other. Fast, agile, and seemingly unbeatable, it had already destroyed hundreds of American planes in the early months of the war. At Pearl Harbor, the Zero tore through American defenses. In the Philippines, it swept Allied aircraft from the skies. And across the Pacific, one question haunted every U.S. pilot. How do you fight an enemy plane that you can't even touch? But fate has a strange way of turning wars. And sometimes history changes not through a grand battle, but a single crash on a lonely island far from the front lines. This is the story of that crash. The story of one test pilot, one captured Zero, and one moment of discovery that turned the tide of the Pacific War. The morning of June 4, 1942, the same day the Battle of Midway raged in the Central Pacific, a small Japanese fighter squadron took off from the carrier Ryujo. Their mission? Attack the U.S. base at Dutch Harbor in the distant Aleutian Islands of Alaska. Among them was a 19-year-old pilot, Flight Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga. He was skilled, proud, and flying one of Japan's best-kept secrets, the Zero fighter. The mission went smoothly. Bombs fell, fires burned, and the squadron turned back toward their carrier through the fog and wind that forever cloaked the Aleutians. But as Koga's plane flew low over Akutan Island, his luck ran out. His Zero had taken a single bullet, one that punctured the oil line. The engine began to seize, and black smoke filled the cockpit. Koga knew he couldn't make it back. He spotted a stretch of soft green grass on the island and decided to belly land the plane. He lowered the flaps, kept the nose level, and glided in. But what looked like solid ground was actually a bog, deep, for waiting. The Zero's landing gear dug in. The plane flipped forward violently and crashed upside down. The cockpit was crushed. Tadayoshi Koga died instantly. His two wingmen encircled, helpless. They saw his body hanging in the straps and no movement. They couldn't risk landing. So with heavy hearts, they flew away, leaving behind the only intact Japanese Zero ever to fall into American hands. For weeks, the plane sat there, silent, half buried in mud, its silver-gray wings reflecting the lonely Alaskan sun. Until one day, an American PBY Catalina patrol plane spotted something strange on the ground, a shape that didn't look American. When they came closer, they realized what they had found. A Japanese fighter, almost completely undamaged. The news spread fast. A recovery team was sent immediately. They dug the plane out of the bog, flipped it upright, and cleaned off the mud. The fuselage was nearly perfect. A few broken parts, a crushed canopy, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. Painted on the tail was the red rising sun of Japan. It was the Mitsubishi A6M20, the same aircraft that had terrorized American pilots. Across the Pacific, the Americans could hardly believe their luck. This was their golden ticket, a chance to uncover every secret of Japan's mysterious superplane. The captured Zero was shipped carefully to Dutch Harbor, then loaded onto a Navy transport bound for San Diego, California. There, it was handed to the Navy's premier flight testing center at Naval Air Station North Island. The man chosen to fly it was Lieutenant Commander Eddie R. Sanders, a skilled test pilot from the Bureau of Aeronautics. Calm, analytical, and fearless, Sanders had spent his career testing aircraft limits. But this was different. He was about to fly the enemy's best weapon. The engineers began the painstaking process of restoring the Zero. They replaced the propeller, patched bullet holes, and repaired the landing gear. The engine, a Nakajima Sakai 12 radial, was carefully cleaned and tuned. In August 1942, the plane was ready. The Americans gave it a name, the Akutan Zero. When Sanders first walked up to it, he was struck by its beauty. The Zero looked light, almost delicate, its thin skin of aluminum barely thicker than a coin. The cockpit was tight, the controls simple, the instrument panel stripped of luxury. It was built for one purpose only: performance. On September 20th, 1942, Eddie Sanders climbed into the cockpit strapped in and brought the engine to life. The propeller spun, the roar filled the air, and for the first time ever, an American pilot took off in a Japanese Zero. What he found would change everything. At first, Sanders was impressed. The Zero lifted easily and handled beautifully at low speeds. It could turn tighter than any American fighter he'd ever flown. It felt alive, like a bird. But when he pushed it harder, the cracks began to show. At speeds over 200 knots, the ailerons, the small control surfaces on the wings, became stiff. At 250 knots, they froze completely. High-speed rolls? Impossible. Suddenly, the famous agility of the Zero disappeared. Then came another shock. During -G maneuvers, when the plane went nose down sharply, the engine sputtered and quit. The float-type carburetor, designed for efficiency, cut fuel whenever the plane went inverted or dove suddenly. That meant one thing. If an American pilot dove straight down, the Zero couldn't follow. For the first time, they had found the perfect escape tactic. Sanders flew the Zero 24 times over the next few weeks. Each flight revealed something new, a weakness, a limit, a secret. He discovered that while the Zero's light frame gave it agility, it also made it fragile. One or two .50 caliber bullets could tear through the wings or shatter the fuel tank. It had no armor behind the pilot, no self-sealing fuel tanks. It was a deadly sword, but one that broke easily when struck. When the test flights ended, Sanders and his team compiled everything they had learned into a detailed report. The conclusions were clear and revolutionary. To beat the Zero, American pilots had to avoid slow-speed dogfights. Instead, they had to use diving attacks, high-speed passes, and hit-and-run tactics. Stay fast, stay high, and never turn with a Zero. This intelligence went straight to the top, to the Navy's fighter development team and to the designers at Grumman Aircraft. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect. At that exact moment, Grumman was finishing a new fighter, the F6F Hellcat. It was meant to replace the F4F Wildcat, a plane that had fought bravely but was no match for the Zero speed and climb. The Hellcat's basic design was ready, but the final refinements were still being decided. Then came the Akutan Zero report. It changed everything. Engineers immediately strengthened the Hellcat's frame, giving it thick armor behind the pilot and around the engine. They designed new metal-covered ailerons with hydraulic boost, allowing perfect roll control even at high speeds. They replaced the float carburetor with a pressure carburetor that could handle any maneuver, even -G dives, and they increased its speed, climb rate, and dive power. The result was a beast, a plane that could take punishment, hit harder, and dive faster than anything in the sky. When the first F6F Hellcats rolled out of the factory in 1943, they carried not just American engineering, but Japanese lessons. Every weakness discovered from Koga's Zero had been turned into a Hellcat strength. Meanwhile, out in the Pacific, the air war was changing. New pilots were being trained on fresh tactics, the very ones written after Eddie Sanders' test flights. Don't turn with a Zero, they were told. Climb, dive, and use your power. American squadrons drilled endlessly, practicing the boom and zoom attacks, where they dive on a Zero at high speed, fire a burst, and pull up before the enemy could react. The fragile Zeros couldn't follow. Their controls locked up in the dive, and their engines coughed out under -Gs. Soon, the results began to show. In early 1943, in battles over the Solomons and New Guinea, the Hellcat made its debut, and the Japanese pilots were stunned. Their once invincible Zero was suddenly outmatched. But this was just the beginning, because the true test of the Hellcat, and of everything learned from that single captured Zero, was still to come. Part 1 ends here. Part 2 will continue the story. From the Hellcat's dominance at Tarawa and the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, to its record-shattering 19-to-1 kill ratio and the end of Japanese air supremacy, it's the story of how a single crash on a lonely island helped win the Pacific War. By the spring of 1943, the U.S. Navy had a new weapon, the Grumman F6F Hellcat. It was big, heavy, and powerful. Some pilots joked that it looked like a bear compared to the Zero's bird-like frame. But that bear was about to rule the sky. Every inch of the Hellcat was designed with one goal: to destroy the Zero. It was tougher, faster, and smarter. Its 2,000 horsepower engine gave it a roar that could shake the deck of a carrier. It climbed like a rocket, dove like a stone, and could outfight anything in the Pacific once it reached speed. But most importantly, it could take hits and keep flying. Its armor protected the pilot. Its fuel tanks were self-sealing. Its guns, 650 caliber, Browning machine guns, could tear a Zero apart in a single pass. The lessons from the Akutan Zero were written in every rivet of the Hellcat's skin. This was not just another airplane, it was the answer to everything the Japanese had once dominated. The first Hellcats entered combat in August 1943 with VF-5 and VF-9 squadrons aboard the USS Essex. At first, pilots were cautious. They had heard stories of the Zero's incredible agility and feared meeting it head-on. But when they finally met the enemy, they were shocked. The Hellcat could match the Zero turn for turn at medium speeds, and when it came to speed and dive, it was untouchable. A new era had begun. Pilots quickly developed confidence. They learned to fight with discipline, using hit-and-run attacks, never dogfighting for long. The training manuals had changed, and now every pilot knew the secret weaknesses of the Zero, information born from that single captured plane and Eddie Sanders's test flights. Soon, the results spoke for themselves. In the skies over the Gilbert Islands, over Rabaul, and across the Solomon Sea, the Hellcat began to rack up victories at a staggering pace. By November 1943, the Hellcat made its mark in one of the most brutal battles of the Pacific, the Battle of Tarawa. As U.S. Marines stormed the beaches below, Hellcats screamed overhead. Japanese Zeros scrambled to defend the island. 30 Zeros rose to meet them. The Hellcats cut through the formation like lightning. In minutes, 30 Zeros were gone, and only one Hellcat had been lost. It was a message to the world. The tide had turned. In early 1944, the Pacific sky belonged to the Hellcat. Carrier decks that once feared Japanese bombers now launched waves of confident young pilots who trusted their machines completely. The Hellcat wasn't just a fighter, it was a symbol of a new kind of air. Or, it was rugged, forgiving, and made for the average pilot. It turned ordinary men into heroes. One Navy pilot said, "The Hellcat made me feel like Superman. It would take anything I could give it, and still bring me home." Grumman, engineers called their aircraft the Iron, works because it seemed indestructible, and in the next great clash of the Pacific, that toughness would make history. June 1944, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. 300 Japanese planes rose to challenge the American fleet. They came from 9 carriers, determined to stop the U.S. advance toward the Philippines. Waiting for them was a wall of Hellcats, more than 400 of them. The result would become legendary: the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. From the first moment, it was chaos. Japanese pilots, many young and poorly trained, rushed headlong into American formations. Hellcat pilots dove from above, using tactics perfected from Eddie Sanders' notes. They stayed fast, attacked from the sun, and never turned tightly with the Zeros. The Japanese planes, unable to match the speed or roll of the Hellcat, became easy targets. Everywhere, the sky lit up with tracer fire and burning wrecks. In a single day, the Hellcats shot down more than 300 Japanese aircraft for the loss of just 29 of their own. It was one of the most one-sided air battles in history, and it marked the end of Japan's carrier air power. Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Task Force 58, later said, "The Hellcat was the reason we could go anywhere, anytime, and never fear the enemy again." From then on, victory followed the Hellcat wherever it went. Over the Marianas, the Philippines, Formosa, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, the blue-painted fighter ruled the sky. By war's end, the Hellcat had destroyed 5,163 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat. It achieved an unmatched 19-to-1 kill ratio, 19 enemy planes for every Hellcat lost. No other fighter in history had done that before. Not the Spitfire, not the Mustang, not even the later jet fighters. It was the most successful carrier-based fighter ever built, the king of the Pacific. But beyond the numbers, there was something deeper. Every Hellcat victory traced its roots back to a quiet moment in 1942, when a Japanese pilot crashed on a remote island, and an American test pilot dared to fly his plane. Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders never fired a single shot in combat. But his flights in the Akutan Zero changed everything. His 24 test flights gave the Navy exactly what it needed: knowledge. And in war, knowledge is power. Through his reports, the Hellcat's engineers learned what to fix, what to strengthen, and what to exploit. Every bullet that hit a Zero in later battles carried the echo of his discoveries, a chain of cause and effect that stretched from Alaska to the heart of the Pacific. By 1945, the Hellcat had become a legend. Pilots returning home spoke of its strength with awe. It had saved thousands of lives. Pilots who walked off carrier decks with stories of near misses, crashes, and comebacks, all because their plane refused to die. More than 305 Navy pilots became aces flying the Hellcat. Together, they accounted for over 75% of all U.S. Navy aerial victories in World War II. One of them, Lieutenant Alex Vrasiu, shot down 6 enemy planes in 8 minutes during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, all in his Hellcat. He later said, "The Hellcat was my guardian angel. It always brought me back." The aircraft's reputation grew so strong that the Japanese began calling any large American fighter a Hellcat, whether it was or not. To them, it became a symbol of unstoppable American power. In the final months of the war, the Hellcat's job began to change. With Japan's air force shattered, Hellcats now flew escort missions for bombers, struck enemy ships, and attacked ground targets, but even then, its spirit remained the same: bold, relentless, and loyal. When peace finally came in August 1945, the Hellcat's engines fell silent, but its legacy was only beginning. In museums across the world, the F6F stands today, massive, proud, and silent. Next to it, in some cases, you'll see another plane, small, sleek, and fragile, the Zero. 2 enemies, 2 opposites, and between them, an invisible line that connects them through history: the crash of a 19-year-old pilot, and the genius of a test pilot who turned loss into victory. The Akutan Zero itself didn't survive long. After the test program ended, it was damaged in a ground accident, and later destroyed in a crash landing. But its legacy lived on in every Hellcat that rolled off the Grumman line. What began as an enemy weapon became the teacher of its own defeat. The knowledge taken from that plane gave America the key to the Pacific skies. By 1944, Japan's once proud Zero was no longer feared, and the Hellcat, born from its ashes, ruled unchallenged. So when we look back at the Pacific War, it's easy to focus on the big moments: Midway, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. But sometimes, victory doesn't come from a fleet or a bomb. Sometimes it comes from one crash, one discovery, and one pilot who dared to fly the enemy's wings. From the muddy fields of Akutan Island to the burning skies of the Marianas, the chain of events is clear. One young man's death, one test pilot's courage, one aircraft's evolution. Together, they turned defeat into dominance and helped secure victory in the Pacific. This is the untold story of the Akutan Zero and the F6F Hellcat, the captured enemy that taught America how to win the sky.